Welcome back, advanced environmental thinkers, to our explainer on sustaining our planet. Today, we are officially ascending to Level 3, Global Citizenship. We are moving way past your local recycling bin and stepping directly into the international boardrooms, the global treaties, and the massive supply chains that actually govern our Earth. We're going to dive deep and unpack the intricate, interconnected global systems that are actively shaping our planet's future right this second. Our goal today? To move past just treating isolated symptoms and instead look at the very architecture of global environmental stability. So here is our roadmap for today to help equip you with that global lens. We're going to welcome you to Level 3, talk about adopting a systems perspective, break down some global frameworks and goals, discuss the role of science, and finally, lay out your specific mission moving forward. Okay, let's jump right into Section 1 and acknowledge the incredibly strong foundation of knowledge you've already built up to this point. You've already successfully navigated Step 1, mastering those localized, micro-level actions like basic recycling or figuring out the journey of a single plastic bottle. And in Step 2, you leveled up to connecting communities, exploring how things like neighborhood gardens and local policies can create real change. But let's be real, eventually community action hits a ceiling. A brilliant local composting initiative is fantastic, but it can't stop transnational air pollution or a global collapse in biodiversity. And that is exactly why we need Step 3. You already know that everything is connected, but Level 3 is about discovering the sheer, massive scale of those connections. We are stepping onto the complex international stage, which is where the real survival of our ecosystems is negotiated. Now, moving right along to our second section, let's explore what it actually means to look at the world through a brand new, interconnected lens. This is where we really shift our mindset. The mental shift required here is actually pretty profound. Think about it. A local lens focuses on whether you responsibly recycle your old smartphone. It's important, for sure, but it's an isolated action. A global lens, on the other hand, is an enormous expansion of scope. It tracks the entire international supply chain of that phone, from the intense mining of rare earth metals in developing nations, all the way to the global economics driving planned obsolescence in the tech industry. Moving to a global lens means scrutinizing international economics and relentlessly digging to uncover the actual root causes of global instability, rather than just putting a band-aid on the end result. So the crucial point of adopting a systems perspective is realizing that these environmental challenges aren't just random, isolated problems popping up out of nowhere. They're actually interconnected symptoms of much deeper issues. Changing one part of the system creates massive ripple effects throughout the entire environment, the economy, and society as a whole. Literally nothing happens in isolation. Think about it this way. A seemingly simple decision to heavily subsidize a specific crop, let's say corn in North America, can drastically shift global market demands. That sudden shift can suddenly make it highly profitable to clear-cut rainforests in South America just to plant competing export crops. An economic lever pulled in one hemisphere directly causes deforestation in another. It's wild, right? And this understanding leads us directly to the concept of global citizenship. Because global problems intrinsically demand global solutions, becoming a true global citizen means stepping up to engage with these incredibly complex challenges. But I'll be honest, there is some real friction here. Recognizing our shared responsibilities means accepting a kind of uncomfortable truth. Our local conveniences, like ultra-fast shipping or incredibly cheap fast fashion, are often entirely dependent on global practices that harm communities and ecosystems thousands of miles away. Understanding how our daily reality impacts others across borders is really the only genuine way to build a more just and sustainable world for everyone. All right, let's move into Section 3 and see how all of this builds into the massive institutional frameworks attempting to manage our shared planet. We've got some heavy-hitting concepts for Level 3 here, so let's unpack exactly what they mean. First up, the triple planetary crisis. This is the UN's framework that recognizes the three main, totally interlinked issues humanity currently faces: climate change, devastating pollution, and massive biodiversity loss. Now, to manage that overwhelming crisis, we rely on global environmental governance, or GEG. These are institutions like the UN Environment Program and binding international treaties like the Paris Agreement that attempt to create rules for the entire planet. We then see how these GEG frameworks are guided by the Sustainable Development Goals, or SDGs. Think of these as a collection of 17 incredibly ambitious, interconnected global targets set by the UN to end poverty, protect the planet, and ensure peace. And finally, we trace how all of this international architecture actually filters back down to empower local environmental actions, or LEAs. It's really about seeing how a massive global treaty can eventually fund a critical climate resilience project right in your own city. But here's a really fascinating question we have to ask ourselves before we move forward. Think about it. If we have this massive architecture in place, and we have these 17 goals beautifully outlined in international agreements, why is fixing the planet actually so difficult in reality? Why isn't the path forward perfectly clear? Well, that brings us to Section 4, the role of science, where we have to acknowledge the immense weight and, frankly, the ambiguity of real-world environmental policy. When the path isn't black and white, robust scientific evidence absolutely has to be our compass. It informs policy, identifies emerging challenges, and drives innovation. When we're dealing with those massive economic and social ripple effects across borders, solid data is literally the only authoritative basis we can rely on. Think about the reports from the IPCC, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. Those massive scientific reports serve as the agreed-upon baseline of reality for international negotiations. They ensure that when 190 countries sit down at a table, they aren't wasting time arguing over basic physics. They share a scientific vocabulary, which is the only way to even begin making sound decisions. However, science alone isn't always enough to solve the problem. The data might tell us exactly what's happening, but it doesn't automatically resolve differing international perspectives or fiercely competing economic priorities. For instance, climate science dictates that humanity needs to stop burning coal immediately to prevent catastrophic warming, but an agile real-world policy has to account for the reality that shutting down the coal industry overnight would cause total economic collapse and mass starvation in regions that are entirely dependent on coal mining. If a strategy isn't agile enough to manage that kind of economic fallout, it's just going to fail. We absolutely must use scientific data to design bold strategies that are incredibly adaptive. We have to be prepared to navigate that intense ambiguity and adjust our course as real-world human scenarios inevitably shift. Finally, Section 5. This is where we hand this powerful toolkit over to you. You are no longer just an observer. You're a newly informed advocate. Your explicit mission in Level 3 is to dive right into the complexity. You are challenged to think critically and question deeply at every single turn. You need to relentlessly unpack global economic forces, which, let's be honest, really means you need to follow the money. When a new environmental policy is proposed, your job is to figure out who profits immensely from it and who ends up paying the price. You've got to explore how data and technology can reshape our path forward. Like, did you know open source satellite data is now being used by everyday citizens to track illegal logging in real time? It's amazing. And crucially, you must take all this macro-level systemic knowledge and use it to engage in grassroots movements. The most effective advocates out there are the ones who understand the massive global systems, but know exactly where to strike locally to create real lasting leverage. So as we wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with this final provocative thought. There are absolutely no easy answers to the triple planetary crisis. The systems are vast and the friction is very real. But armed with an understanding of global economics, massive governance frameworks, and the necessity of agile, science-backed strategies, you are prepared. So how will you use this global lens to become a powerful agent of change? The future of our interconnected world depends entirely on your answer.